Welcome everyone to our Zoom Art Talk. Today we are honored to have Gannit Ankori, the Henry and Lois Foster Director and Chief Curator of the Rose Art Museum at Brandeis University, to give a talk on Hannah Wilke and her art practice. Our gallery is fortunate to have an exhibition of Hannah Wilke's work on view right now, titled Friendship. The exhibition is on through April 10, which is next weekend. The Rose Art Museum has a work of Hannah Wilke in their collection and had staged a seminal group exhibition in 1996 titled More Than Minimal, Feminism and Abstraction in the 70s, and Wilke was amongst the 11 artists featured. Now let me introduce Gannit to you. Dr. Gannit Ankori was appointed the Henry and Lois Foster Director and Chief Curator of the Rose Art Museum at Brandeis University on January 1st of this year, after serving 6 months on an interim basis. She was a member of the museum's board of advisors and its collections committee, and curated 3 past exhibitions before taking on her current leadership role. Gannit joined the Brandeis faculty in 2010 and is a professor of art history and theory and women and gender and sexuality studies. In addition to leading the Rose, Gannit maintains an active role as a teacher and an international scholar and curator, allowing her to integrate the Rose into campus life as well as into the global art world. She is internationally renowned for her groundbreaking scholarship on Frida Kahlo. Her current show, Frida Kahlo Appearances Can Be Deceiving, is up now at the De Young Museum in San Francisco. Iterations of the show appeared at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, at the Brooklyn Museum of Art in New York. Additional exhibitions are scheduled for Holland this fall and Paris in 2023. Closer to home, Frida Kahlo Pose, a small but focused exhibition on the iconic Mexican artist, which Gannit has co-curated with Mexican fashion scholar and curated the, I apologize, I don't know how to pronounce her name, is Circe
Enestrosa.
Enestrosa, okay, will open at the Rose in mid-May. So everyone in Boston, please go and see the show. Gannit earned her doctorate from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. In addition to Brandeis, she has taught at Harvard University, Tufts University, School of the Museum of Fine Arts, Hebrew University, and MIT, where she currently serves on the board of directors of the Graduate Consortium of Women's Studies. So I'm going to pass the microphone to you. So
Thank you.
Please welcome Gannit.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Listen, thank you for that introduction. It was indeed way too long. And I'd rather talk about Hannah Wilke than about myself. So thanks, LaiSun, for inviting me. And thank you all. I mean, thank you all for making time on a holiday weekend to hear me talk about Hannah Wilke. And what I want to do today is kind of link the Rose Art Museum group exhibition in 1996 with LaiSun Keane Gallery's current exhibition, and to think about Hannah Wilke in general and her practice, and how really she was way before her time in many of the things she did, quite misunderstood. But let me begin at the beginning. In 1996, the Rose Art Museum staged a group exhibition of 11 women artists, as LaiSun said, who were abstract or minimal artists. And she called it More Than Minimal, Feminism and Abstraction in the 70s. So before I even say anything, I feel immense gratitude to Susan Stoops. She is an incredible feminist scholar and curator. And if it were not for her, the Rose would not own many of the works that we have today by these women artists from the 1970s through the 1990s. And this show was like many generous and generative shows and works of scholarship. it really acknowledged, Susan acknowledged a lot of her predecessors, scholars like Whitney Chadwick and Lucy Lepard and Hélène Cixous and many, many others. Some of them I'll mention. So she was really being very generous to everyone, but her original kind of thesis, which seems very obvious today, was really radical during her time, was to look carefully at the art of the 70s and see that there was these 11 women were producing work that was not either or, but it was both abstract, minimal, but also feminist. So at that time, if I walk you back to that time, the minimalist artists, especially men, were thinking about art as being devoid of narrative. Art was formal. So anything that was about storytelling or about life or about sensuality did not have a place in minimalist art. But these women artists, and here you see, this is Hannah Wilke's work, one of them we own. On the face of it, it looks like just an abstraction, you know, the grid, geometric form, repetition, all the things that we know from minimalist art from the 60s and 70s. But when we look closely, and we will very soon, we see that it's subversive, that it's minimal, it's abstract, but it's more. And that's where the more than minimal comes in. Here are some installation shots. The work of Anna Mendieta. Here you have Body Tracks, which the Rose owns, and the videos and other things she did. This is Eva Hesse's work, Jackie Ferreira. And I'm coming back to Wilke's work because I want you to notice this is a detail of one of the works. This is the work from the Rose Art Collection. It actually was acquired before the exhibition in 1993. And it looked abstract when we saw it from afar, but close looking reveals that these individual components are not geometric or formal or at all. They're not kind of cerebral and stiff and devoid of meaning. They are made of kneaded erasers, and they are shaped deliberately like some part of the female genitalia. Take your pick if you want to call it vulva, if you think it looks like a clitoris or vaginal. It's suggestive of that and was meant to be that. So what Hannah Wilke did was, yes, she's abstract, but she wants the body and experience and sensuality and narrative and her lived experience to be part of the work. She also wanted humor. And those of you who know Carl Andre and Donald Judd and some of the male minimalists, I'm thinking of Ad Reinhardt's quote, "Art is art and everything else is everything else, and it is not art." Thinking that there was some sort of polar, diametrically opposed existence between the formality of a visual art and content or experience or life. She also added humor, and instead of calling it kneaded erasers, she called it kneaded erase her and made it a feminist statement. So it is a pun and it's funny, but it's also a statement about how patriarchal society erased women. And she is kind of bringing the return of the repressed, the vaginal imagery, that she wanted to place front and center, to put into our range of vision. The other subversive thing that she does as well, and in that she's also has commonalities with the other 10 women in the show, she uses an eraser. She uses materials to create art that are not the traditional materials. So this is part of her subversive way. And I want to give Susan Stoops' voice. This is from the catalog. She writes, beginning in the 60s, Hannah Wilke determined to devote her aesthetic energies to what she would describe as, and this is a quote by the artist, the creation of formal imagery that is specifically female, a new language that fuses mind and body into erotic objects that are nameable and at the same time quite abstract. Its content has always related to my own body and feelings, reflecting pleasure as well as pain, the ambiguity and complexity of emotions. Human gestures, multi-layered metaphysical symbols below the gut level, translated into an art close to laughter, making love, shaking hands, end of quote. So giving voice to Susan Stoops, the curator, and the artist herself, who says, I can be both minimalist, both an abstract artist, and decidedly feminine. I can work with my head as well as with my heart and my hands and every other part of my body. So currently on view at LaiSun's gallery is a story of the friendship between the Axelrod family and Hannah Wilke herself. And for their sons, Mayan's bar mitzvah, she made kind of this triptych, if you will, using gum sculptures. So she didn't just use erasers. She also used gum and other materials like lint and, you know, things that are not expected to be art, but she transformed an art and also made it into a kind of, bless you, composition. And her use of gum, Hannah Wilke wrote, gum is the perfect metaphor for the American woman. Chew her up, get what you want out of her, throw her out, and pop in a new piece. So in the 70s, an avid feminist, she was trying to express this through the materials that made art. The thing that LaiSun's piece introduces is Hannah Wilke's Jewish identity. So not just a feminist, but also a Jew, and we'll discuss that a little bit as we go along. So this signature form, the fold and double fold, became a kind of emblem for Wilke. This is in ceramics. Some of these are gum. These are also ceramics. So she, from many, many different materials, she made this sign that for her was both beautiful, meaningful on many different levels. So on view now, in right behind LaiSun is this work, which is also made of gum. You see that here too, the minimalist grid is introduced. So this visual language of minimalism is very much on Hannah Wilke's mind, but she disrupts it by using gum to introduce her little markings, which are, again, very, very suggestive. Now, in some of these, they look like, as we said, like genitalia, like vulva like a vagina, like a clitoris, but in some they begin to look like wounds or scars. And indeed, this is part of a series that Hannah Wilke worked on that is called SOS, Starification Object Series. And it ranges from 74 through the 70s. And again, you see that using rice paper mounted on rag board, not the materials of what was called high art, and chewing gum. So this is one of the ways of looking at, I want to kind of expand my conversation about Wilke, because the works that Susan Stoops chose for the Rose and the work that I showed earlier, they're only one aspect of Wilke's multifaceted practice. She also did videos, she did self-portrait photographs, she did these beautiful latex sculptures and wall hangings. And this is one of the ways that she exhibited her art in the 70s, where you have a multitude of genres together. And I want to talk a little bit about this figurative aspect of the SOS, Starification Object Series. So the idea is that she used her own body from the beginning until her death to create art. So the abject, sometimes like a gum that you're supposed to throw away, or an eraser, or lint, those are the materials that she tried to elevate and make into art. And here in this series, she poses in different kind of positions that are almost stereotypical of this would be like someone from a magazine, a stereotype of someone who with rollers in her hair, etc. But she disrupts with these little elements. She uses her body as the canvas, if you will, and these little vulvas, if you want to call them, these little bubblegum objects, she disrupt our vision, disrupt our gaze. And what she was doing was thinking about how usually male artists objectify women and make them kind of objects of sexual desire by looking at them, by employing the gaze to objectify them. What she does is she disrupts the body and what we want to see and covers it up with these little ugly things. Some people during that time called them, they look like pimples, like a rash, like little scars, etc., etc. I have to say, though, that many of the people, of the feminist critics of the time, were actually accusing her of being a narcissist, of showing her perfect body, and of reinscribing the sexualization and objectification of women. But Hannah Wilke was not deterred. She called SOS as a cry for help, and she called it Scarification Object Series. And she linked the star and the scar with her being female, but also Jewish, with the star related to the Jewish star. She was born Hannah Arlene Butter in 1940 in the US, and she was always aware that, and this is a quote from one of the interviews with her during that time, remember that as a Jew during the war, I would have been branded and buried had I not been born in America. starification, scarification, Jew, Black, Christian, Muslim, labeling people instead of listening to them, judging according to prejudices. So she was looking at these as scars that mark her as female, mark her as other, mark her as like a Jewish star or a scar. And these two she put into grids with actual sculptures made of chewing gum in her signature shape. And moving from herself to a broader thinking about patriarchy, there's a number of female genitalia chewing gum works where she takes, this neoclassical Lincoln Memorial, and she just completely overtakes it with the feminine, the female, the organic. I want to move now to this work that continues this kind of thinking and focuses on her Jewish identity. This is a series that she did in 1982, in the 80s already. And in the 80s, her mother had breast cancer, and then her mother died. And at the same time, she started thinking about her mother's kitchen, the concept of parve, which is in Jewish law, it's neither meat nor milk. And my interpretation of this work is based on Joanna Frew and Norman Kleeblatt, that link her self, showing herself as Venus, but making Venus different than the marble or bronze Venus of classicism. She makes them of plaster and paints them in garish colors, making them kitsch, or she makes them from chocolate and perishable ideas, and names herself a kind of parve Venus. This was linked by her own sister, Marcy Charlotte, to the Mother's Kitchen. And I find this quote really, really moving. She says, Hannah's art began in our mother's kitchen with its smell of cinnamon and raisins and the shiny black prune centers of Hungarian pastries baking in the oven. Sorry about the typo. I see Hannah, her small hands caked with flour, folding the triangle squares and crescent dough as intently and skillfully as she would later form her gums and ceramic sculptures. So when we think of that, sorry, I want to go back to these. When we think of that and we think of how personal these forms were for her, they weren't just about the female form, they were about her mother, her own mother, and matriarchy, as opposed to patriarchy. And at the same time that she started, and even before Venus Parve, she had portraits of her mother as her mother was recovering from breast cancer and showing herself always disrupted by, these are little weapons and elements of violence and patriarchy, but showing herself almost mirroring her mother's aging and ill body post-surgery. And the close relationship was something that became very, very apparent after her mother passed away. And again, here she reverts back to Judaism. Instead of calling her Selma Butter, which is the name that she had been using, she called her Surechaya, her Jewish name. And in the writings that go along with this series, where she, took photographs of her beloved mother, she writes that she and her mother joked that the bald head made, due to chemotherapy, the mother called my Auschwitz. So seeing things through this Jewish prism as well. And the little bird, she thought of her mother as a soul, a little bird always there. So I want to move to the last series that I will discuss and link it to the works that are up in the gallery. This is from LaiSun Keane's website, and this looks abstract again, very abstract. But this actually is from a series titled BC, which means before chemotherapy. And it's a series after Hannah Wilke was diagnosed with lymphoma. Before she started the treatment, she would make daily portraits of herself, so self-portraits with these loose strokes that, for me, they're very moving because they look like she's both falling apart, but also constructing herself through art. And here are two more. So you see they really could look like abstract art, but as the works in, this is 1990, but just like the works in More Than Minimal, where you had abstraction that could also be read simultaneously as figurative, as narrative, as meaning carrying, meaning beyond the formal qualities. And here we see that she is constituting a face through abstraction. So it's not either abstract or figurative, and it's not either universal or feminist. It's both. It's all of them. And it's all related to experience, which is part of Susan Stoop's thesis in the exhibition, that relationships and lived experience infuse even the minimal work with that more, with that quality of more. So the very, very final series that Hannah Wilke produced was based on her illness. And she died in 96, and the show took place parallel to the Rose exhibition in 1996 in the Ronald Feldman Gallery. And I'll show you some installation shots, but it's photographs documenting the treatment that tried to cure her but failed. But also other elements like watercolors, sculptural objects, drawings, etc. And here is, so this is an installation shot, and I want to call your attention to this kind of black grid upon which are these folded objects, this time not bubble gum, not anything. They are from ceramics, but they are black and look almost like charcoal, something like that. And around, we don't see her youthful body, but we do see her body unabashedly revealing both, and it's not her performing a stereotypical identity, but it's her performing both herself and other identities, as we will see in the details. Another aspect of these works are drawings. Here are drawings of hands. We'll see a close-up, and chunks of hair that we will also see. So making art out of hair, like making it out of discarded gum or lint, is something that where she shows it's art from the body again, but also something that is usually seen as abject, if we think of Kristeva's term, something that's unworthy of representation. And she insists transgressively, radically, to make art out of it. So again, each gallery in the big gallery, each room in the gallery had a center with these paradigmatic objects, with her here posed like Venus, here posed in ways that are usually not seen as this kind of woman, ill, aging, unposed, naked rather than nude, is usually viewed as unworthy of representation in art. But she revolts against those premises. So, almost like a Madonna, here she talks here also about her, how shall I say, she quotes her mother, calls this again her Auschwitz. This triptych, she shows a body that's very different from her youthful body, but imposes that conjure up art histories, reclining nude or odalisque, actually really disproving a lot of the critique that was that faced her in the 70s. And I want to show that there is some continuity where she performs these identities here, almost like a Oriental woman with something on her head, here again with like something that looks like a keffiyeh. But here she has these scars that evoke emotional scars or markings in the SOS, calling for help. And here she has physical signs of the cancer that is actually killing her. And these two she put in grids as she did the early ones. And I think her defiance and her bravery and her way of facing death, the way she faced other elements, and making art from all of it is something that's, for me, very, very powerful. The drawings that we saw every day, she made drawing or watercolor painting of her hand, like the portraits that we saw earlier from the BC series. We see that it's kind of abstracted. She's almost falling, the hand is almost disintegrating before our eyes, but also cohering before our eyes. And here you see the tubes and the intravenous. And here comes the idea of humor, thinking about the term intravenous, saying she's Venus again, but it's also intravenous, the medical term. So always using these puns, always using words, not just images, and always using humor, not just the seriousness that we see. She creates art from her bone marrow. The bone marrow samples that she collects, she dates. This is March I think, March 18th, 1992. And these are also works of art. So again, abstract, but very meaningful and very related to, very much related to lived experience. And here I want to mention the scholar Linda Need, who writes about what is showable and what is not showable in traditional art. And what is not showable is the inside of the body, the bone marrow, spittle, urine, all these elements that are not worthy of becoming art. And Wilke uses not just her representation of her body, a photograph of herself, but also the repressed and abject elements of the body. And as often happens, every brush stroke that she took, she lost hair. And every day that she made, or not every day, but she made this and called it brushstrokes. And the brushstrokes, again, using hair as art, making it an abstract composition that also has meaning, that is related to the living body or the dying body. I want to talk about the way she writes brushstrokes here, and to compare it with what was happening in the art world at that time. So the abstract expressionists, this is Franz Klein, were using gestures and really deliberate brush strokes as a way of composing abstract expressionism. In response to that, pop artists like Roy Lichtenstein were mocking these brushstrokes by making them like comics out of Bend-Aid dots. So depleting them of the expressiveness of the gesture. In reference to this, Wilke makes her very own brushstrokes, which are not only art making, but are also the body. They're not just conceptual, they're also sensual and carnal. And I want to show you these two elements, again, the grid and these vaginal images and the fallen hair, and these that are seen as elements of the female body that are really not often represented. And I want to quote Amelia Jones, who actually saw the exhibition, and her response to the exhibition Intravenous. Arrayed randomly on a black wooden base, the charcoal sculptures read ominously like a pile of burnt bones. Piles of blackened bones and loose human hair are signifiers not only of Wilke's cancer, but of the Holocaust. So, linking her very last works, or very last show, with one of her earliest works, we see the continuity. Her using figuration and abstraction, using minimalism, but giving it more, using a variety of materials that are transgressive, and always wanting to represent the female point of view as she writes. And before opening it up to questions, I wanted to give both Susan Stoops and Hannah Wilke the final word. So this is from the catalog More Than Minimal. and this is, so you'll see, part of it is Susan's voice and part of it is Wilke's voice. The extraordinary challenge that Wilke personally undertook as feminist and artist is one which her art passes on to a new generation. And from the artist's statement, she quotes, "To touch, to cry, to smile, to flirt, to state, to insist on the feelings of the flesh, its inspiration, its advice, its warning, its mystery, its necessity for the survival and regeneration of the universe." End of quote. So I end here with Susan Stoops and Hannah Wilke, and thank you very, very much.
Thank you. That was a very powerful presentation. I feel so honored that you are here to do this. Some parts were so mind-blowing. Okay, so we have our Zoom friends. Please, if anyone have any questions, you can just unmute and go ahead and ask.
Right, and could I also ask if Tori, if you wanted to say anything, because Tori is now in the process of creating art that's based and inspired, not based, on More Than Minimal, which was like a really, really, people say seminal, I don't like that word too much, but a crucial exhibition that changed people's thinking.
Yeah, I really enjoyed kind of taking a deeper dive into Hannah Wilke with you. I was so enamored by this show and just felt like somehow I was part of this stream, you know, and I wanted to go back and really understand what Susan Stoops meant by the more. And I thought that you like really did a great job really looking deeply into Hannah's work. I focused on other artists in the show more who I could interview who are still alive, but it's true that that show had a few deceased artists, and I hadn't realized that Hannah Wilke had died like right at that moment.
Yeah.
And one of the things I really enjoyed about Susan's show is that it was in '96, but she was presenting work that had been done sometimes even 20 years before. So it was a very current contemporary show with this history of work that was, again, not widely shown because some of the women's work, of course, got overlooked, and the determination of these artists to let their subjective voice come through with touch and trace is just so beautifully manifested with her trajectory as well. And I do think like the artists in this show had really different trajectories. You know, some went in different directions from the gallery and museum into public and outside and even more design work. So all the more beautiful to kind of look at the longer trajectories to understand like, wow, like Hannah, that's so poignant, the work that she was doing in that last show, and just how it plays out some of those beginning instincts.
You know, Tori, one of the things that Susan also insists upon is that there are multiplicities, and there isn't one feminisms, and there isn't one abstraction, and there isn't one form of minimalism. And what you're saying about the artist being overlooked is really true, because in the 70s, of course, the minimalist artists were mostly the men who were seen, and the feminist artists were mostly more narrative and figurative, like the stuff that Judy Chicago and Miriam Shapiro were doing on the West Coast. So a lot of these women were overlooked as women, but then overlooked as abstractionists. And only later was their work appreciated. And I think Susan Stoops cites, yeah, it was a really fantastic show. And it was a germinal show, right? A germinal show. That was one that Elaine suggested. Thank you. Thank you. Are there other questions or comments?
You know, Gannit and I have been sharing a little bit about the show that's on now at the National Museum of Women and the Arts by Sonia Clark, for whom hair is her major material in all sorts of forms. And if people don't know about her or that show, I don't know that it derives from this use of the hair, but it certainly is a contemporary version. And in her case, reflecting her identification as a woman of color as much as anything that is the woman voice of the 70s, that I think is worth, glancing at with this in mind.
Yeah, and I also was very interested in works by Mona Hatum, who used hairs in the 90s, and Doris Salcedo, of course. And those are actually two artists, I think, who are later iterations of, for example, using the grid, using very rational or formal language, but then infusing it with hair or with ideas of trauma, history, biography, etc. And I think now male artists are doing that as well.
Who knows?
Yeah, but if we should meet in DC to see the National Museum of Women in the Arts, Sonia Clark's exceptional work. Yeah. Other comments or questions? Yeah, Leo, hi.
Hi. Thank you, Gannit, for a beautiful and powerful presentation. Really amazing work, and you really showed, as others said, the subversive, elements of her work. That working in a male-centric art world, that she needed to use the master's tools, but she subverted so much in such a smart way to really bring forth her her own story of feminism and others ideas. I wanted to ask maybe if there is, because her was her it or her sister that says about the baking.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the first thing that came to my mind was Hamantashians with their sexuality, in the, that there's also some element of maybe a fortune cookie. I don't know. Again, I don't know. Is there like maybe some, mentioning of this kind of uh, underlying, influences, I'll say, maybe.
Yeah, well, her sister, none of the art historians mentioned it. About her use of chocolate, um, Joanna Frew, wonderful. I mean, all these brilliant feminist art historians, but Joanna Frew said that her using chocolate for the Venus Parve was related to Valentine's and that kind of kitsch, romantic notion of love. But her sister was the only one who kind of drew that line. And I love that. It's essay she wrote called Songbird, and it's in the Intravenous catalog. And it's a beautiful essay relating it to, you know, what you do in the kitchen. You need, how do you know how to knead? How do you know the word knead? You don't need erasers, you need dough. So putting that physicality, that way of making. And, you know, it reminds me also of Anna Mendietta's cousin in one of the documentaries, talks about how they would play on the beach with sand and make these sculptures and stuff. And you know, when you hear her remember that, and then you look at the Silueta series, you understand that, you know, these actions, these playful elements from childhood on, if you let them, if you either they're repressed or they carry into your work. But yeah, you know, now we'll look at fortune cookies very differently.
Gannit, there's a question from there's no name, but
iPhone, from iPhone. Hi,
oh,
iPhone 626. Influence. Did Hannah's art give permission to younger generations of artists to work? Yes, so you know that, well, we have some artists here, but most artists don't like to say that they were influenced directly, but some do. But, you know, I think she was a precursor. If you think of her SOS Starification object series, really an important series. And then you think of Cindy Sherman performing identities and disguises and different poses, etc. Or if you think about artists making art out of hair, for example, that we discussed here. I think of some of the artists who are her peers and some who came a little bit later. And it's hard to know if it's direct influence or inspiration or a similar trend of thought. But you have a lot of artists, especially women artists, who are attracted to that the rigor of the minimalist grid, but then they soften it. So, for example, Eva Hesse at the same time uses latex instead of, let's say, the metal that some of the men are using. Mona Hatum takes the cube shape. That's, if you think of Smith's black cube or something like that. So the black cube, she takes it, but she makes it from magnet, and it looks like entrails. It looks visceral. It looks like organic rather than universal and straight. So I think that the influence is definitely there. And I think that in performance art, I didn't have time, you know, to show the her videos, but I would phrase it this way. In the patriarchal system, the objectification of the female body, it's a site of repression and control of the male gaze or the artist who paints the model, etc. And Hannah Wilke took her own body, the site of repression, and transformed it into the site of liberation. And I think you see that in a lot of contemporary artists who are making video art and performances as a kind of empowering their own body to be, they are the subject. They're no longer an object. They use their own body. No one else is going to use their body. So I think that would be my answer.
May I also add, there's a trans gender artist called Casilles who actually made performance art like that, where of the body, showing the trans body, and they actually took series of photos like in grids and placed them in grids, just like Hannah Wilke did, especially referencing her Super T art series.
Right.
It wasn't in your presentation, but the grid with the that kind of like references Jesus Christ with the robe and all that.
Yeah.
That's what Hannah Wilke's work. Castile's actually, to my mind, it's very clear referencing of her work.
Absolutely.
So,
I would also add, LaiSun, that Castile is represented by Ronald Feldman. So if you look at the website for Ronald Feldman Fine Arts to see more images from Intravenous and Hannah Wilke, you can look at Castile, whose work is there. And also, if we're talking about trans artists, we have in our collection, Martine Gutierrez, who also makes these magazines, again, using this kind of trope of the glamorous woman, but making, I don't know if she goes by they or she, making themselves into these, one time it's like Kim Kardashian, another time it's like someone else. So I think this concept of the performativity of the selves in plural is something that Hannah Wilke did, and many others do.
I think we had a very, very enjoyable, very engaging session. Thank you, Gannit. I think it's 6 o'clock, so we just have to end here. Gannit, a million thank you for doing this.
I want to encourage people to go to LaiSun Keane's gallery, because we have to encourage art. I also want to encourage people to come to the Rose Art Museum. We are probably reopening to the public in June, hopefully. June 3rd is the exact date of our 60th anniversary. And we will have some really fantastic exhibitions, a small exhibition of Frida Kahlo, and a very, very large exhibition of our permanent collection in new ways, showing it in new, I would say, subversive ways. So thank you all for coming.